The photographer lowered his camera and frowned slightly. "Excuse me," he said to my mother, glancing in my direction. "Should I include her in the family photo?" My mother didn't even look at me. She adjusted the pearl bracelet on her wrist and gave a polite smile. "No," she said lightly, as if the answer were obvious. "We don't need the help in the pictures." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The help. Not daughter, not sister, just the help. I was sitting at the last table in the ballroom, close enough to hear the string quartet warming up behind the stage and the quiet clatter of plates coming from the kitchen doors. Table 28, the vendor table. Florists, photographers, event coordinators, and apparently, me. Across the room, my twin sister Evelyn stood under a chandelier that probably cost more than my restaurant's monthly rent. Her ivory gown caught the light every time she turned, and guests kept stepping forward to congratulate her like she'd just won some kind of lifetime achievement award. Same dark hair as mine, same eyes, same face, 10 minutes younger. But somehow, in my mother's version of reality, she was the only daughter worth introducing. The photographer hesitated for a second, unsure if this was some kind of awkward joke. Then he quietly nodded and lifted the camera again, this time angling the frame so I disappeared completely. I looked down at the linen napkin folded beside my plate. For a strange moment, I didn't feel angry, just familiar. Like hearing a song you've heard too many times before. Someone pulled out the chair beside me. I barely noticed at first. Then a calm voice said, "You're Adrienne Hayes." Not a question, a statement. I looked up. The man standing beside the table was tall, mid-30s maybe, dark hair with a streak of silver at the temples. His suit was perfectly tailored, Tom Ford if I had to guess, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to. "I am," I said slowly. He studied me for a moment. Then a small smile appeared. "I thought so." He took the empty seat next to mine like he belonged there. Across the ballroom, my mother was laughing at something Christopher Whitmore's father had just said. She hadn't noticed anything. Not yet. But when this man stood up later that night to make a toast, the entire room would suddenly realize something my family had spent years pretending wasn't true. And my mother's expression would change in a way I'd never seen before. But that moment didn't happen until much later. 6 months earlier, the whole thing had started in a quiet kitchen in Brooklyn. It was almost midnight. The restaurant had closed hours ago, and the only sounds left were the hum of the refrigerators and the soft scrape of my knife against a wooden cutting board. Fresh pasta dough stretched across the counter in front of me, 3 millimeters thick, perfectly even. Cooking has a way of quieting everything else in your head. Deadlines disappear. People disappear. Families disappear too, if you're lucky. Which is why I almost ignored the phone when it started vibrating on the counter. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I watched it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. My mother didn't call very often. Not on birthdays, not when my restaurant opened 3 years earlier, not even during holidays unless there were guests around. When she finally did call, it usually meant one thing. She needed something. I wiped flour from my hands and answered. "Adrienne." No hello, no small talk, just my name. "Your sister is engaged." I leaned back against the counter. "That's great," I said carefully. "Who's the guy?" "Christopher Whitmore IV, corporate attorney, excellent family." Of course he was. I could hear crystal glasses clinking in the background. She was probably at one of those Upper East Side dinner parties where everyone pretends their lives are flawless. "The wedding will be in June," she continued, "at the Waldorf Astoria." I whistled softly. "That sounds expensive." "It will be an important event." There was a pause. The kind she always used when deciding how to phrase something unpleasant. "We're finalizing the vendors," she said. "And I thought of your restaurant." There it was. Not an invitation, a request. Or more accurately, an expectation. Could you help with the catering? I stared at the pot of stock simmering quietly on the stove. 350 guests, she would later explain. Professional catering for that kind of event could easily cost $50,000. Mom, I said slowly, that's not really helping. You wouldn't have to do everything. Just assist the main team. Assist. In other words, work for free. This is your sister's wedding, she added, her voice cooling slightly. Surely you can make an exception for family. Family. She only used that word when it benefited her. I looked around my kitchen. Copper pans hanging above the stove. Shelves lined with olive oil from Tuscany. The small chalkboard where I rewrote the menu every morning. Everything in that room existed because I had built it from nothing. I can't give away $50,000 of labor, I said quietly. I have employees, rent, a business to run. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then she spoke again. I see. The words were colder now. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's best you don't come at all. The line went dead. I stood there for a while after that, listening to the broth simmer and the refrigerator's hum. Across the kitchen, the door opened. Marco Bellini, my business partner, walked in carrying a bag of groceries. He took one look at my face and stopped. What happened? My sister's getting married. Marco set the bag down slowly. And you look like someone just died. I gave a quiet laugh. My mother asked if I'd cater the entire wedding for free. He nodded once. Of course she did. Then he leaned back against the counter and studied me carefully. So, he said, are you going? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched the steam rising slowly from the pot on the stove. Finally, Marco spoke again. You need to decide something first. What? He tilted his head. Are you going as a daughter? He paused. Or as staff? I didn't answer, but deep down, I already had a feeling, and somehow, even then, I knew that wedding was going to change everything, just not in the way my family expected. My phone lit up again before Marco had even finished unpacking the groceries. Evelyn. I stared at her name longer than I should have. My sister and I used to talk without thinking about it. Quick calls between classes. Inside jokes, late-night complaints about professors. Back then, hearing from her felt ordinary. Now it felt like a small disruption in the air. I opened the message. Hey, Adri, Mom said you two talked. I hope everything's okay. I read it once, then set the phone face down on the counter and kept wiping flour from the stainless steel surface. A minute later, it buzzed again. I know things have been weird between us, but you're still my sister. Then another. I really want you there. It won't feel right without you. I let out a breath through my nose and leaned both hands on the counter. The thing about carefully worded messages is that sometimes what they leave out matters more than what they say. She didn't ask what Mom had said. She didn't ask whether I was hurt. She didn't mention the catering, not once. Everything in those texts was polished, tidy, almost lawyerly. The emotional equivalent of a clean contract. Nothing messy, nothing direct. No admission that our mother had basically said I could either donate a fortune in labor or stay home. Marco shut the refrigerator with his hip and looked over. That expression again, he said. Your family? My sister. He waited. She says she wants me at the wedding. And my mother wants free catering and a grateful smile. He gave me a look that said exactly what he thought of that arrangement. I picked up the phone again and read the messages one more time. It would have been easy to pretend none of it mattered, to tell myself Evelyn was just trying to keep the peace, that she was caught in the middle, that weddings made people strange. But the truth was, Evelyn had never really been caught in the middle. She had always known which side of the room was warmer. We were twins, but for most of our childhood, people treated us like one unit. Same classrooms, same birthday cakes, same dance recitals where we stood shoulder to shoulder in matching shoes and stiff smiles. At school, teachers mixed us up. Friends laughed about it. Even adults who knew us well sometimes paused before saying our names. My mother loved that when we were younger. 2 daughters. Same face, same future. She had a whole script she used at parties. Columbia, pre-law, bright girls, strong girls, girls who were going somewhere important. For a while, it was true. We both got into Columbia. We both started down the path she had laid out so neatly. The kind of path that looked impressive when repeated over cocktails. Then I went to Italy one summer and ruined the symmetry. It was supposed to be 3 weeks. I told everyone it was a trip, but it turned into something else almost immediately. I found small kitchens instead of museums. I traded comfort for room and board. I woke up before dawn in places where women who had been making pasta longer than I'd been alive worked with a kind of patience I had never seen in New York. They didn't rush. They didn't perform. They just made things well. I remember the first morning I stood in a kitchen in Bologna, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour, watching an old woman cut dough into perfect strips without measuring a single thing. No wasted motion, no drama. Just knowledge that had settled so deep into her body it looked like instinct. Something in me went quiet that summer. And then, for the first time in my life, something else woke up. By the time I came home, I knew I couldn't go back to pretending I wanted the life my mother had selected for me. I told her in the dining room of her townhouse. She sat very still while I explained that I was leaving pre-law, that I wanted culinary school, that I wanted kitchens and food and work I could hold in my hands at the end of the day. She didn't yell. That would have felt honest. Instead, her eyes filled with tears and she said, "Do you have any idea how this looks?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Are you happy?" Not, "What do you need?" How this looked. That was the moment I understood something I had probably known for years without admitting it. My mother didn't love the life I wanted. She loved the version of me that reflected well on her. Evelyn, meanwhile, stayed exactly where the plan said she should. Law school, corporate track, the right internships, the right people, the right wardrobe, the kind of life that photographs beautifully and sounds even better when introduced at dinner. I didn't resent her for succeeding. What I resented was how easy it became, after that, for everyone to act like we had started from different places. Like she had become impressive, and I had simply drifted. My phone buzzed again. "Mom says you might not come. Please don't let a misunderstanding turn this into something bigger." A misunderstanding. I laughed once, but there wasn't anything funny in it. Marco heard it and turned from the stove. "That bad?" She called this a misunderstanding. "Ah," he said. "So we're in the part where no one says the quiet thing out loud?" I looked at the screen. Part of me wanted to throw the phone into my bag, go upstairs, sleep for 6 hours, and wake up pretending my family didn't exist. But another part of me, that stubborn, exhausted part that had kept me working 16-hour days and opening a restaurant with borrowed money and sheer nerve, already knew what I was going to do. Sometimes you go, not because you believe people will change. You go because you need to see, with absolute clarity, that they won't. I typed back before I could second-guess it. "Congratulations, I'll be there." That was all. No warmth, no apology, no soft landing. I hit send. Marco watched my face. "So that's your answer?" "I'm going." He rubbed the back of his neck like I'd just told him I planned to walk barefoot into traffic. "You know exactly what kind of weekend this is going to be." "Yes." "And you're doing it anyway." "Yes." He shook his head, but not in judgment, more like resignation. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. Heavy cardstock, engraved lettering, cream and gold. Expensive in the way things are when they're designed to communicate status before anyone even reads them. I stood in the kitchen, opening it with the tip of a paring knife. Christopher's name was everywhere. His parents' names, too. Evelyn's name sat in the middle of the page like a polished jewel. Mine appeared much lower down, smaller, buried among the formalities. Not sister of the bride. Not family, just another attendee, another body in the room. I pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet and stepped back. Marco read it, then looked at me. In my country, he said, people would be ashamed to send this to a sister. I folded my arms. In this city, people spend more time designing invitations than relationships. That got the smallest smile out of him. For the next few weeks, the cards stayed there, catching the kitchen light whenever I reached for milk or herbs or cream. June got closer. The restaurant got busier. Summer always did that to Brooklyn. More people out walking, more reservations, more late nights. I threw myself into work because work obeyed rules. Service started, service ended. Food either came out right or it didn't. Families were harder. One night after closing, Marco caught me staring at the calendar tacked near the prep station. You're counting down. I need a dress, I said. He blinked. That's what you're worried about? It's black tie at the Waldorf. I can't show up looking like I escaped from a stock pot. He laughed under his breath. Fair. 2 days later, I left the restaurant early and walked into a consignment boutique in Park Slope I'd passed 100 times without entering. The place smelled faintly like cedar and old perfume. Dresses lined the walls in quiet colors and expensive fabrics. The woman behind the counter looked at me, then at my shoes, then back at me. Special event? Wedding. Budget? $200. One eyebrow lifted, but she kept her opinions to herself. A few minutes later, she handed me a dress in emerald silk. Simple cut, elegant without begging for attention. Older, probably vintage. The kind of dress that didn't need to shout. I took it into the dressing room and pulled it on. When I stepped out, the woman didn't hesitate. That's the one. It fit like it had been waiting for me. Not glamorous, not bridal adjacent, not trying to compete with anybody. Just right. As she folded it into tissue paper, she asked, almost casually, Whose wedding? My sister's. Close? The question landed harder than she meant it to. I smiled anyway. Technically. Back at the restaurant, Marco demanded to see it. I said no. He ignored that. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the tiny office near the back, wearing the dress, while he leaned against the desk, judging me like a mildly emotional tailor. Well, he said finally, you look like someone they'll regret underestimating. Too dramatic. I'm Italian. That is not possible. Then he got quieter. You and your sister really do look alike. I looked at myself in the mirror. He was right. Same dark hair, same eyes, same bones. But resemblance only goes so far. She would be wrapped in couture and approval. I would be wearing secondhand silk and paying for my own train ticket. The week before the wedding, I overprepared for everything. Schedules for the staff, ingredient orders, wine notes, backup instructions. I wrote pages and pages, as if leaving for 48 hours required military planning. Marco caught me doing it and said, You're acting like you're going overseas. I like things covered. No, he said, watching me. You like control when you know you're walking into something you can't control. I didn't answer because he was right. The night before I left, he drove me to Penn Station. The car smelled like garlic, coffee, and the inside of his leather jacket. We stood by the trunk while people hurried around us with suitcases and irritation. He lifted my bag out and set it on the sidewalk. Then he said, Listen to me. I looked up. You are not what your mother calls you. Something in my chest tightened. You built your life with your hands, he said. Do you understand how many people never build anything at all? A station announcement crackled overhead. Passengers started moving toward the platform. I hugged him quickly before I could get embarrassed by how much I needed the words. Take care of the restaurant. He waved that off. Go survive your family. I got on the train and took a window seat. Brooklyn blurred past in streaks of brick and light. I leaned my head against the glass and watched the city slide by, feeling that strange stillness that sometimes comes right before something irreversible. At the time, I thought the difficult part would be walking into the wedding. I thought the hardest thing waiting for me in Manhattan was my mother. I had no idea someone else would be there, someone who would look at me like he already knew exactly who I was. The Waldorf Astoria looked less like a hotel and more like a monument. Tall stone walls, brass doors polished so perfectly they reflected the afternoon sun. A line of black town cars idling along Park Avenue like something out of a movie. My taxi pulled up behind them, and for a second, I didn't move. Manhattan had always felt sharper than Brooklyn, cleaner edges, brighter surfaces. The kind of place where people walked faster and smiled less. The driver popped the trunk. "You here for the Whitmore wedding?" he asked casually. I hesitated a beat. "Yes." He whistled softly. "Big crowd this weekend." That sounded about right. I stepped onto the sidewalk with my suitcase and followed a bellman through the revolving doors. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors that reflected the chandeliers overhead, white orchids arranged in towering glass vases, soft piano music somewhere in the background. The entire lobby carried that quiet, expensive calm that comes from decades of wealth moving through the same hallways. The bellman glanced at a clipboard while we walked. "Checking in with the Whitmore Hayes party, ma'am?" "That's what I assumed," I said. He nodded and approached the concierge desk. A woman in a navy suit began scanning the reservation list. Her finger moved slowly down the page, then stopped. She frowned slightly. "Just a moment." They spoke quietly together for a few seconds. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the bellman glance at me once, then back at the list. When he returned, his polite smile had shifted a little. "Apologies," he said carefully. "I'm not seeing your name with the family suite." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm the bride's sister." He nodded quickly. "Of course." Then he looked back down at the paper. "We do have several vendor arrivals scheduled today. If you're with the catering or event staff, check-in is through the service entrance on 49th. For a moment, I just stared at him. "I'm not with the staff." His expression turned even more apologetic. "If you have your own reservation, we'd be happy to assist you at the main desk." Right, my own reservation. I wheeled my suitcase across the marble floor to the front counter and booked a room. 3 nights, 8 floors up. By the time the keycard slid across the counter, the total on the screen read $1,275. I didn't argue. There are certain conversations that only make you look smaller if you have them in public places. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled faintly of fresh linen and citrus cleaner. The room itself was beautiful, in the same way most luxury hotel rooms are beautiful. Neutral colors, soft lighting, everything arranged like it belonged in a catalog. But it wasn't the family suite, and we both knew why. I set my suitcase down and laughed once under my breath. Of course my mother hadn't reserved a room for me. Why would she? After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me. The rehearsal dinner wasn't until evening, and sitting alone in a quiet hotel room wasn't going to make the afternoon pass any faster. So I went exploring. Downstairs, the ballroom level buzzed with quiet preparation. Staff moved quickly through the corridors, carrying trays of champagne glasses, boxes of flowers, stacks of folded linens. Near the entrance to the grand ballroom stood 2 large easels, seating charts, cream-colored cards, elegant calligraphy, white roses framing the edges. I walked closer. The first few tables were easy to understand. Table 1 through 8, immediate family and senior partners from Christopher's law firm. 9 through 15, friends from college and law school. 16 through 22, extended relatives. 23 through 27, professional contacts. I scanned the names slowly. Then I found mine, table 28. At first, nothing seemed strange, until I looked at the other names listed beside it. Robert Chen, Sarah Martinez, David Walsh, Jennifer Lee, Marcus Anderson. Recognition came one piece at a time. The photographer, the florist, the band manager, The event coordinator, the catering supervisor. I stood there, staring at the card while guests walked past behind me laughing about something. My mother hadn't placed me with distant relatives, or friends, or even acquaintances. She had placed me with the hired staff, the vendor table. For a long moment, I didn't move. Eventually, I stepped back and walked away before anyone could notice me reading it. Back in my room, my phone buzzed almost immediately. An email. Subject line: Vendor Coordination, Table 28. I opened it. Dear Miss Hayes, as part of the vendor coordination group, please note the following guidelines for tomorrow's service. Vendor dress code. Vendor entrance. Vendor meal schedule. I read it once, then again. They didn't just seat me with the vendors. They had registered me as one. My phone buzzed again, a text this time. Mom. I stared at the message before opening it. I hear you have concerns about the seating. Another message followed before I could respond. Please don't make this difficult. Evelyn has many important guests to accommodate. Important guests? I typed slowly. You seated me with the vendors. The 3 typing dots appeared, then disappeared, then returned. Finally, another message came through. Adrienne, you're 31 years old. Act like it. I set the phone down on the bed. Outside the window, late afternoon traffic crawled along Park Avenue. Horns echoed faintly between the buildings. For a few minutes, I seriously considered packing my bag again. Going back to the train station, returning to Brooklyn where people knew my name and no one pretended I was invisible. But another thought settled in just as quickly. If I left now, I'd never really know how far they were willing to push this. And some part of me needed to see it. So I stayed. 2 hours later, I walked back down to the ballroom for the rehearsal dinner. The room looked like something designed for a magazine spread. Champagne-colored linens covered the tables. White orchids floated above the centerpieces. A string quartet played softly near the stage, while servers moved through the room carrying silver trays. 300 guests, expensive suits, designer dresses, conversations that sounded effortless and practiced. I found table 28 tucked near the kitchen doors, half hidden behind a column. Perfect placement if you wanted a group of people to remain unnoticed. 5 chairs. All empty. The vendors hadn't arrived yet. I sat down alone. From that angle, I could see the head tables clearly. My mother stood beside Evelyn, greeting guests as they approached. Evelyn looked exactly the way bridal magazines promised she would. Perfect posture, flawless hair, smiling at the right moments. People lined up to congratulate her. My mother introduced her again and again, like she was unveiling a work of art. Neither of them looked toward my corner of the room, not once. 15 minutes passed. Laughter rose and fell across the ballroom. Eventually, a waiter approached my table. Are you waiting for the rest of the vendor team? Vendor team? The phrase landed strangely in the air. This is my assigned table, I said. He glanced down at his chart, nodded politely, and walked away. I sat there quietly while someone across the room raised a glass for a toast. Applause followed. 30 feet away, my family celebrated together under warm chandelier light. I might as well have been sitting in another building. After a while, I started to stand. Leaving suddenly didn't seem so dramatic anymore, just practical. I pushed my chair back. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. A man stepped inside. Tall, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair with silver at the temples. His suit fit him perfectly, in that effortless way expensive suits do when the person wearing them is used to rooms like this. More than that, though, it was the way he moved. Calm, unhurried, like he belonged wherever he decided to stand. People noticed him immediately. A few guests turned to whisper to each other as he crossed the room. But he didn't stop to greet anyone. He scanned the tables once, then his eyes landed on me. And he started walking straight toward table 28. My stomach tightened for reasons I couldn't explain. Within seconds, he reached the table and pulled out the chair beside mine. You're Adrienne Hayes. Not a question, a statement. Yes, I said slowly. He sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. My name is Julian Cross, he said. His voice carried a faint British accent. I've been wanting to meet you. I blinked. I'm sorry, do we know each other? Not personally. He folded his hands on the table. But I know your work. That caught my attention. My work? Yes. A small smile appeared. I've eaten at your restaurant 3 times. My brain scrambled to place him. He continued easily. October 12th. You adjusted the sauce on a tagliatelle dish 3 times before sending it out. I stared at him. You remember that? And November 3rd, and 2 weeks ago, he leaned back slightly. All excellent meals. I exhaled slowly. You've been to my restaurant 3 times. Yes. Then he glanced around the ballroom. His gaze drifted toward the head tables where my mother and Evelyn stood laughing with guests. When he looked back at me, his expression had changed. Something sharper. Though I have to admit, he said quietly, I didn't expect to find you sitting at the vendor table tonight. Neither did I. For a moment he studied my face like he was piecing something together. Then he said softly, Your family doesn't seem to understand what they have. Before I could answer, the wedding photographer approached carrying 2 cameras. The moment he saw the man beside me, his eyes widened. Mr. Cross! Julian stood and shook his hand casually. Good to see you, Robert. The photographer blinked, clearly surprised. I didn't realize you were attending tonight. I'm here with Adrienne. Robert looked at me again. Recognition flashed across his face. I've heard amazing things about your restaurant. Julian rested one hand lightly on the back of my chair. You should, he said. Adrienne is one of the most talented chefs in New York. Across the ballroom, Evelyn turned her head. For the first time that evening, my sister looked directly at table 28, right as Julian leaned slightly closer and spoke quietly beside me. Would you mind if we moved to a better table? I frowned. Why? He stood, adjusting his jacket with calm precision. Then he looked down at me and said, Because I think it's time everyone in this room understands exactly who you are. For a second, I didn't move. The ballroom was full of voices, clinking glasses, quiet music from the quartet. But suddenly, everything felt distant, like the sound had been pushed behind glass. Julian was still standing beside the table, waiting. You want to move tables, I repeated. Yes. He said it simply, as if he had just suggested stepping outside for air. I glanced toward the front of the room. My mother was still greeting guests near the head table. Evelyn stood beside her, smiling with that same careful expression she used whenever cameras were nearby. Neither of them had noticed anything yet. If I move tables, I said quietly, it's going to cause a scene. Julian tilted his head slightly. Then it will be an interesting one. Something about his calm made it difficult to argue. Before I could decide whether this was a terrible idea, he reached for the back of my chair and pulled it out. Come on, he said gently. I stood. The moment we started walking, people began to notice. You could feel it ripple through the room in small reactions. A glance here, a whisper there. Julian Cross walking across the ballroom was enough to get attention on its own. The fact that he was guiding someone from the vendor table made it even stranger. A man in a navy suit near the center of the room straightened immediately when he saw him. Mr. Cross. Julian stopped briefly to shake his hand. Good evening. James Whitmore, the man said quickly. Christopher's cousin. Ah, family. James gestured toward the empty seats at his table. You should join us. Julian looked toward me. Adrienne? Every person at the table turned at the same time. Curiosity moved across their faces in almost identical expressions. Who is she? Why is she with him? I slid into the open chair while Julian sat beside me. James was still studying me. And you are? Julian answered before I could. This is Adrienne Hayes. A small pause settled over the table. the bride's twin sister. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable. Eyebrows lifting, quick glances exchanged. James blinked. Twin sister? Yes, Julian said easily, and the owner of one of the most interesting restaurants in New York. Now everyone leaned in a little closer. A restaurant? James's wife asked. In Brooklyn, Julian continued, 26 seats, handmade pasta. Extraordinary attention to detail. I felt my face warm slightly. You're exaggerating. Not at all. He glanced around the table. In fact, if any of you enjoy food worth remembering, I'd suggest making reservations soon. It won't stay easy for long. James laughed. Well, now I'm curious. Questions started immediately. What kind of cuisine? How long has it been open? Do you specialize in Northern Italian or Southern? For the first time since arriving that evening, people were speaking to me like I existed. Not because of my last name, because of my work. Across the ballroom, something shifted. I didn't notice it immediately, but Julian did. Your mother just saw us, he murmured quietly. I followed his gaze. At the head table, my mother had turned halfway toward our side of the room. The smile she had been wearing froze mid-expression. Even from across the ballroom, I could see the exact moment confusion crossed her face. Then tension. Evelyn noticed it next. She leaned toward my mother and whispered something quickly. Both of them looked directly at our table. Back where I was sitting, the conversation continued. What inspired the restaurant? James asked. Mostly stubbornness, I said. Julian chuckled softly. That's an understatement. I glanced at him. You started it with about 16-hour days and no guarantee it would survive the first year, he added. That too. James's wife leaned forward. 26 seats sounds tiny. It's intentional, I said. When the room is small, you control every plate. Across the ballroom, my mother suddenly stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. Several people turned their heads. She started walking toward us, not quickly, not angrily, but with the controlled determination of someone who had just realized the evening was slipping out of her carefully arranged plan. Julian noticed immediately. She's coming. I can see that. When my mother reached the table, her smile had returned, but it looked tight. Adrienne, she said warmly, too warmly, may I speak with you for a moment? Julian stood politely. Mrs. Hayes, he said, extending his hand. Julian Cross. Recognition flashed across her face instantly. Of course she knew the name. Anyone connected to hospitality, luxury events, or high-end dining in New York knew it. She shook his hand automatically. Yes, of course. Then she turned back to me. A word, please. Julian stepped aside. I'll keep your seat, he said quietly. My mother guided me out of the ballroom into the hallway. The moment the doors closed behind us, the smile vanished. What are you doing? She hissed. Having dinner. At a table you were not assigned to. They invited me. With him, she snapped. I folded my arms. Yes. Her voice dropped lower. Do you have any idea who that man is? I know he likes pasta. This is not funny. She leaned closer. Julian Cross consults for half the luxury hotels in Europe. The Whitmores have been trying to meet him for months. That explained the panic. So the problem isn't that I moved tables, I said slowly. The problem is who I moved with. Her expression hardened. This weekend is about your sister. I'm aware. Do not make it about you. I met her eyes calmly. I didn't walk across the ballroom, I said. You did. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something sharper. Instead, she inhaled slowly and smoothed the front of her dress. Just behave, she said finally. Then she turned and walked back into the ballroom. When I followed a few seconds later, every conversation at the table had stopped. Julian looked up. Everything all right? For now. He studied my face carefully. Then he smiled. Good. Why? Because I think this evening is about to get interesting. The appetizers arrived shortly after that. Delicate scallops plated on white porcelain, surrounded by citrus beurre blanc and tiny microgreens arranged like they had been measured with a ruler. The kind of dish designed to impress people who didn't cook. I took a bite. Too much lemon. Slightly under-seasoned. Chef instincts never really turn off. Julian noticed my expression. Problem? Just observing. He nodded knowingly. Professional reflex. Across the room, Christopher's father approached the microphone. The music faded. Guests slowly turned their attention toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate Christopher and Evelyn. Polite applause moved through the ballroom. The speech followed the usual path. Christopher's education, his career, the bright future ahead. Then he spoke about Evelyn, her intelligence, her accomplishments, how proud he was to welcome her into the Whitmore family. Applause again. My mother smiled proudly at table 1. I noticed something quietly. Not once did he mention that Evelyn had a twin. Julian leaned closer. You see the pattern? Yes, I said quietly. When the speech ended, the room relaxed again. Servers cleared plates. Fresh pasta arrived for the next course. Handmade orecchietta with broccoli rabe and sausage. I took a bite. Better. Still needed salt. Across the room, Evelyn stood and walked to the microphone. Her voice carried easily. Confident. Controlled. Years of legal arguments had polished her public speaking into something smooth and effortless. She thanked Christopher. She thanked his parents. She thanked her friends. She thanked my mother again. But not once did she mention me, not even as an afterthought. Julian watched quietly. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. At one point, Evelyn's gaze moved across the ballroom. For a brief second, our eyes met. Then she looked away, like I was part of the furniture. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Guests returned to their conversations. Wine glasses clinked. Music started again. Julian sat silently for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. I think I'll say a few words. I nearly choked on my water. You weren't invited to speak. That's never stopped anyone. You'll create a scene. Possibly. Before I could stop him, he stood, and the room began to notice. Conversations faded as people watched him walk toward the microphone. Several guests whispered to each other. Christopher looked confused. My mother's smile disappeared again. Evelyn went completely still. Julian reached the microphone and adjusted it slightly. Forgive the interruption, he said calmly. His British accent carried easily across the room. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julian Cross. Recognition spread through the ballroom in waves. I work with several international hospitality groups, he continued, and occasionally I have the pleasure of discovering exceptional culinary talent. My stomach dropped. Then he turned slightly and gestured toward our table. Tonight, he said, I had the unexpected privilege of meeting someone whose work I've admired for quite some time. 300 people followed his gaze directly to me. My heart started pounding. Adrienne Hayes, he said. The room went quiet. My mother froze. Julian raised his glass slightly. Owner of one of the most remarkable small restaurants in New York. Murmurs spread through the guests. She is, he continued calmly, one of the most talented chefs working in this city today. Across the room, Evelyn's smile disappeared. Julian lifted his champagne glass. To the Hayes sisters, he said. Both remarkable women. For half a second, the room hesitated. Then applause broke out. Not polite applause. Real applause. 300 people turning toward my table, clapping, watching, noticing. Julian returned to his seat beside me, as if nothing unusual had happened. I stared at him. You just made me the center of attention at my sister's rehearsal dinner. Yes. Why? He picked up his fork calmly. Because sometimes, he said, a room needs help seeing the person it overlooked. By the time I got back to my room that night, I was too tired to sort through what had happened. Not physically tired. Something deeper than that. The kind of exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together in a room where every glance feels loaded. I kicked off my shoes, set Julian's card on the nightstand, and told myself the worst part of the weekend was probably over. I was wrong. At 4:17 the next morning, voices in the hallway yanked me out of sleep. Not normal hotel voices either. These were sharp, fast, panicked. I sat up, disoriented, then swung my feet onto the carpet and cracked the door open. The wedding planner was pacing outside with a phone pressed to her ear, still in yesterday's clothes, her hair no longer perfectly arranged. "Yes, I heard you," she said, trying and failing to keep her voice low. "Food poisoning doesn't make this less of a disaster." She stopped walking and pressed her fingers to her forehead. "I have 350 guests tonight. I don't care what happened at the tasting. I need solutions." That woke me up instantly. I opened the door wider. She ended the call, immediately dialed another number, and started talking before the person on the other end had probably even said hello. "No, listen to me carefully," she snapped. "The whole catering team is out. All of them. I need replacements. I need a kitchen lead, and I needed it 10 minutes ago." I stepped into the hallway. She looked up, startled, like she had forgotten other people existed on that floor. "What happened?" For a second, she just stared at me. Then she recognized me from the night before. "Oh, Miss Hayes." "What happened?" I repeated. She let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. "The tasting team got sick, badly. The entire catering crew is down." "How many?" 32. I did the math before she finished speaking. The reception menu. The service timing. 8 courses, 350 guests. Without leadership, that kitchen would collapse before the first plated course left the pass. "How long do you have?" She checked her watch. 5 hours. That wasn't enough for a random replacement crew to improvise at this level. Not with that guest count. Not with this kind of event. Not if anyone expected dinner to leave the kitchen looking deliberate instead of desperate. She watched my face and seemed to see the calculation happening in real time. "You're a chef, right?" "Yes." "The restaurant Mr. Cross mentioned." I nodded once. There was a brief pause, then she asked it. "Can you help?" The answer should have been no. Objectively, clearly, absolutely no. This was my sister's wedding, my mother's masterpiece, their world, their image, their guests, their choice to seat me with vendors and quietly mislabel me as staff. And yet the moment I heard there was a kitchen in crisis, something older and more instinctive than pride took over. Chefs are strange that way. You can hate the room, resent the people, despise the politics, and still step in when service is about to fail. Because once food is in danger, the kitchen becomes its own moral universe. "How many hotel staff are still available?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. 23. They know the menu, but there's no one to run the line. "Take me downstairs." 10 minutes later, I was standing in the middle of the Waldorf kitchen. It was enormous. Stainless steel everywhere. Prep stations already half loaded. Staff moving too quickly in the wrong directions. Fear hanging in the air like heat. 23 people looked at me when I walked in. Some skeptical, some relieved, some just confused. I tied my hair back and grabbed an apron. "Listen up." The room quieted. "We do not have time to panic." I stepped toward the nearest prep table and started assigning positions. 6 on pasta, 4 on the beef course, 3 on fish. The rest of you split vegetables, garnish, and plating support. They moved, but not fast enough. "Now," I said, sharper. That did it. Knives started moving. Burners turned on. Someone brought me the prep sheets. Someone else asked a question about the reduction for course 3. Another chef needed confirmation on hold times. For the next 2 hours, nothing existed except timing, heat, and order. Not Evelyn. Not my mother. Not the ballroom upstairs. just the work. I tasted sauces, corrected seasoning, reorganized plating flow, shifted one station entirely when I realized the original setup would bottleneck service. I called orders louder than I needed to. I moved faster than I should have in heels I definitely wasn't meant to be wearing in a hotel kitchen. At one point, the planner came back in and just stood there, watching. By then, the room had changed. The panic was gone. Not because the situation was good. It wasn't. But kitchens don't need calm. They need structure. They need someone willing to make decisions and not apologize for them. When the final prep list was locked and the first wave of service strategy was clear, I pulled off the apron and washed my hands. The wedding planner stepped closer. "I think you just saved the reception." I dried my hands slowly. "No," I said. "I just made sure nobody pays this much money to eat bad food." She looked like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or thank me again. I checked the clock. The ceremony would start in 20 minutes. No one upstairs had any idea what had just happened. I went back to my room, shut the door behind me, and leaned against it for a second. My hands still smelled faintly like garlic and butter. I washed them again anyway. Then I brushed out my hair, put on the emerald dress, and looked at myself in the mirror. Same face as Evelyn, same bones, same dark eyes. But by then, the resemblance felt almost irrelevant. One of us was about to walk down the aisle in custom silk under crystal light. The other had just spent the morning holding together the machinery behind her perfect evening. I picked up my clutch and went downstairs. The ceremony was exactly what people like my mother worshipped. White flowers framing the aisle, candlelight reflecting off polished stone, a quartet playing something soft and expensive, rows of guests in black tie, all of them arranged like a social diagram. I slipped into a seat near the back, not hidden exactly, just unclaimed. Christopher looked polished and nervous in the way grooms often do when they are trying very hard to appear calm in front of other wealthy men. Then Evelyn appeared, and for a moment, even I had to admit she looked stunning. The gown, the veil, the silence that moved through the room when she entered. It all worked. It was beautiful, controlled, cinematic. As she passed my row, her eyes met mine for the briefest second. I gave her a small smile. She looked away. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. Vows, rings, applause. Then everyone rose, music swelled, and the crowd began shifting toward the reception ballroom downstairs. When I walked in, the room looked flawless. Chandeliers, champagne towers, jazz near the stage. 28 round tables, glowing under candlelight. And somewhere behind those doors, hidden from every guest in the room, sat the dinner I had spent my morning saving. No one knew, and I had no intention of telling them. I checked the seating chart, even though I already knew what I would find. Table 28, still there, still the same message. I walked over and took my seat, with the photographer, the florist, and 2 event coordinators. This time, they greeted me more warmly. "Back with us," the photographer said with a grin. "Looks that way," I replied. The first course arrived 15 minutes later. Scallops. Clean plating. Balanced composition. Better than what they would have served without intervention. The florist took one bite and blinked. "Wow, this is actually excellent." The photographer nodded. "They recovered fast." I said nothing. Across the ballroom, Evelyn laughed beside Christopher. My mother sat composed at the head table, accepting congratulations as if the entire evening had unfolded naturally, effortlessly, exactly as planned. Then the ballroom doors opened. I didn't need to turn immediately to know who it was. Some people carry attention with them when they enter a room. Julian Cross was one of them. Whispers started almost instantly. He crossed the ballroom with that same measured calm he'd worn the night before, scanning the tables only once before his eyes landed on me. Then he changed direction and headed straight toward table 28. "Adrienne." He pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd come tonight." "Why wouldn't I?" He gave a small glance toward the room. After yesterday. It's still my sister's wedding. His attention shifted to the plate in front of him. He picked up his fork, tasted the scallops, and paused. Then he looked at me. You made this. It wasn't a guess. I kept my voice low. How do you know? The acid balance, he said, and the symmetry on the plate. I looked away for a second, half amused despite myself. He set down the fork. You stepped in, didn't you? The original team got sick. And you saved dinner. I coordinated the kitchen. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that felt almost dangerous. Not threatening, just far too perceptive. You continued to surprise me. The next course arrived, handmade pasta. He tasted that too and gave the smallest nod, like something had just confirmed itself in his mind. Around us, the room kept moving. Laughter, music, silverware, toast waiting to happen. But Julian had gone quieter, more focused. He checked his watch. What? He glanced toward the stage where the microphone waited, then back at me. I think, he said, the evening is about to become memorable. My stomach tightened. What are you planning? A faint smile touched his mouth. Nothing untrue. That was not remotely reassuring. Before I could press him further, the wedding planner stepped onto the stage and lifted the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, it's time for the evening toasts. The wedding planner finished introducing the first speaker, Christopher's best man. Polite laughter followed his stories. A few glasses clinked. The room relaxed again. Julian didn't. He sat beside me at table 28, calm as always, his fingers resting lightly around the stem of a champagne glass. You look like you're waiting for something, I said quietly. I am. For what? For the right moment. The best man's speech ended. Applause rolled through the ballroom again. Then the planner stepped back to the microphone. Next, we'd like to invite a few special guests to share a toast with the couple. My mother straightened at the head table. She clearly expected the next name to be hers. Instead, the planner glanced down at her card. And now, she said, Mr. Julian Cross has asked to say a few words. The reaction in the room was immediate. Whispers. People leaning toward each other. Julian Cross didn't attend events like this unless there was a reason. Julian stood. I grabbed his sleeve lightly. Please tell me you're not about to do something reckless. He gave me that small, maddening smile. I'm about to tell the truth. He walked toward the stage while 300 people watched him. The room grew quieter with every step. When he reached the microphone, he waited a moment before speaking. Good evening. His voice carried easily through the ballroom. For those who don't know me, I work with several hospitality groups around the world. Hotels, restaurants, culinary projects. He paused. And over the years, I've learned something interesting. People leaned forward. The success of an event like this, he continued calmly, depends on many things guests rarely see. He gestured lightly around the room. The flowers, the music, the lighting, and most importantly, the food. Soft laughter moved through the room. He raised his glass slightly. I had the pleasure of tasting tonight's dinner earlier. Then he added quietly, and I can assure you it was exceptional. Across the ballroom, my mother relaxed again slightly. Of course it was exceptional. That's what expensive weddings were supposed to be. But Julian wasn't finished. The reason it's exceptional, he said, is because this morning, when the entire catering team fell ill, the room went still. Someone stepped into the kitchen and saved the reception. 300 heads turned at once, not toward the kitchen, toward Julian. And that person, he continued, is sitting at table 28. The silence thickened. Julian turned slightly. His gaze landed directly on me. Adrienne Hayes. The room followed his eyes again, right to the vendor table. The florist beside me blinked, Wait, what? Julian continued calmly. She reorganized the kitchen, led the staff, and ensured every course you're enjoying tonight actually made it to your table. A murmur rippled across the ballroom. Guests looked at their plates, then back at me, then toward the head table, where my mother had gone completely still. Julian raised his glass. I believe great work deserves to be recognized, he said, even when the person responsible was seated with the vendors. That line landed like a dropped glass. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Then someone at a nearby table started clapping. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Loud applause. 300 people standing or turning toward table 28. The photographer next to me leaned over. Did you really run the kitchen? I nodded once. Yeah. Across the room, Evelyn stared at me. For once, she didn't look composed. She looked stunned. My mother's face had gone pale. Julian finished his toast with one final sentence. To the couple. Then he added, and to the chef who made tonight possible. More applause. He stepped down from the stage and returned to the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I leaned closer. You just detonated a bomb at my sister's wedding. Yes. Why? He looked around the ballroom. People were still glancing toward our table. Then he looked back at me. Because rooms like this have a bad habit of ignoring the wrong person. I let out a breath. For the rest of the night, things felt different. People came to our table. They asked about the restaurant. They complimented the food. Even Christopher's father stopped by at one point. Remarkable work tonight, he said. My mother never approached. Neither did Evelyn. And honestly, I didn't expect them to. Later, when the music got louder and the dancing started, I slipped out quietly through the ballroom doors. The hallway outside was calm again. No orchestra, no applause. Just the quiet hum of the hotel. I leaned against the wall for a second, breathing. Then Julian appeared beside me. You disappeared. I needed air. He nodded. That was quite a night. You turned it into one. He studied me for a moment. Do you regret staying? I thought about it. About the seating chart, the kitchen, the applause, my mother's expression. Then I shook my head. No. He smiled slightly. Good. Down the hall, the kitchen doors opened. For a moment, I could hear the staff inside, laughing, moving trays, finishing the final desserts. The real heart of the evening, hidden where no one ever looked. I watched those doors quietly. Then I said something that surprised even me. You know what the strange part is? What? I didn't come here to prove anything. Julian waited. I just came because it was my sister's wedding. He nodded once. Sometimes that's enough. We stood there in silence for a moment. Back inside the ballroom, the music swelled again. People cheering, glasses clinking, a celebration continuing without us. And for the first time that entire weekend, I felt something settle inside my chest. Not victory, not revenge, just clarity. Some families will never see you clearly, but that doesn't mean the world won't. And sometimes, all it takes is one person in the room willing to say the truth out loud. So now I'm curious, if you were sitting at that vendor table, what would you have done?